All right, Terry Caliendo, Dedicated Managers. Exciting times back again. The OAuth 2.0 Authorization Framework is what we're doing here. IETF 6749. We did the introduction, we did roles, we talked about protocol flow, which is a section I said confused the daylights out of me and made me want to stop reading. But luckily I kept poking around and kept going and started to understand things a little bit better. Again, I'm not a full expert. I'm just kind of learning this stuff and trying to teach what I know about the situation here. So let's talk about the next section, Authorization Grant. This section actually closely mirrors Section 4. So, and it's better to talk about everything in Section 4. But if you see that we've got authorization, well, let's say we've got code, implicit, password, credentials. And if we go down here, you'll see we've got code, implicit, what do we say, password, and credentials. So these two sections match up. I'm going to pop open this section in a new tab so that I don't have to scroll down to it if I have to refer to it. And so we're back here on 1.3. So let's get down to this section and talk about it. So the authorization grant is a credential representing the resource owner's authorization. So we're not always to a token yet, but it is a token is a credential, I believe, but we're not to the token yet. So there's some reasons not to give the token right away that we'll talk about probably more when we get into this section 4, when I can really explain why. But just know that it's something that's being passed around that says that carries the owner's authorization with it. And it's used by the client to obtain an access token, which is true for the code, but not necessarily for the implicit grant, because the implicit, you get the token right away. And we'll talk about that again at some point. This specification defines 4 grant types: the authorization code, the implicit, the resource owner password credentials, and the client credentials, as well as an extensibility mechanism for defining additional types. And I'm 99%, 95% sure we're starting to talk what OpenID does here to add on to add the ID token. But that's a whole nother video in itself. So I'm going to kind of talk through these different ones. I'm going to try and do it quickly because, again, I want to go really in depth when I hit 4.1. That's the time to really go into what all these things are specifically. So really you just need to know that there's 4 different types, 2 of which are what I've seen is the most commonly used. The authorization code is used with a back-end server like a WordPress PHP website where the HTML and stuff are being created on the server. Or the implicit, which would be like a React or a Vue.js type client, where the client it resides on the user's browser, which they call a user agent. So these other ones, resource owner password credentials, I don't think that one's used too much, and the client credentials might be more of a machine-to-machine type deal. I'm not exactly positive because I haven't gotten too far into that myself. But the authorization code here, the authorization code is obtained by using an authorization server as an intermediary between the client and resource owner. So this is what I talked about where in this one, if you did watch the protocol flow and you didn't give up, usually the client isn't getting the authorization grant directly from the resource owner. The authorization server is doing that. And we'll see that in later videos, probably more in detail. Like down here, you can see that the authorization server is between the resource owner and the client, and there's some things being passed around. So let's get back to where I was here. Instead of requesting authorization directly from the resource owner, the client directs the resource owner to an authorization server via its user agent. User agent is the browser. So the browser, the client, which would in this case is the back-end server, is going to send something back to the browser, the user agent, that redirects them over to the authorization server, which in my draw.io example would be the accounts.google.com. So you're being sent over there, which in turn directs the resource owner back to the client with an authorization code. Notice the code the client does not get the token. And we'll talk about that more in depth when we get into this picture over here. But the reason for that is because if you return the token directly to the client in this case, or the user agent, I'm sorry, in this case, the user agent is the browser, and therefore the token would be visible to the browser, and it doesn't need to be because the client is sitting back on the server and it's in a protected environment. So you're getting a code to start with, and then that code will be sent from the user agent, the browser, back to the client, the server, the PHP server, probably Apache, and then Apache will make its own call on the back end, what's called a back channel call, over to the resource server and ask for that token. So this authorization code is sent back in the URL. It's a one-time usage thing, such that once the client uses it to get the token, this authorization code is no good anymore. So that way it can't be stolen or intercepted very easily. It might be able to be intercepted, but it can't be used over and over again. And it shouldn't be able to be intercepted if you're using HTTPS, which you will likely be using. Before redirecting the resource owner back to the client with the authorization code, the authorization server authenticates the resource owner and obtains authorization. So we're not this is where things get confusing sometimes. When I struggled that I wasn't paying attention to what was being authenticated, and it got very confusing for me. Sometimes the resource owner is being authenticated, and sometimes the client is being authenticated. They're two totally different things, right? The client can be down here, and the resource owner can be up here. They're two separate things, and that's what got me confused a lot of the time. I was considering them one thing, like the resource owner is the client. Hey, I work for people. They're my clients. They're people. So that threw me, and we'll get more into it, but just the main thing to take away from there is that those things can be different. Or actually, they are different. So we did that. Before redirecting the resource owner back to the line, yeah, we said this, that the resource owner and obtains authorization, so we got that. And because the resource owner only authenticates with the authorization server, the resource owner's credentials are never shared with the client. So, again, the resource owner is using the user agent. The client sends a redirect to send the user agent over to the authorization server. So in my draw.io example, I should have had this prepared. Let's decide later. And so, we draw something and we go File, Save, and we say we're going to save it to the Google Drive, and we click this Authorize button. Now we're taken over to accounts.google.com. I am not sharing my Google Drive password with draw.io. I am going to use my username and password directly into Google. So I'm not giving this third party my credentials, and that's obviously the whole point of this thing. So that's because the resource only authenticates with the authorization server. Again, that's accounts.google.com. The resource owner's credentials are never shared with the client, and in this case, the client is draw.io. Now, draw.io is a JavaScript application on the front end, but I'm assuming it's going to send information back to its server, and the server is going to do the. I don't think we're doing the implicit flow here, even though this is a front-side JavaScript application. I think it's doing the code flow where the the information is going to be sent back to their server, and then their server is going to do that back channel request for the auth token, and we'll get into that. The authorization code provides a few important security benefits, such as the ability to authenticate the client, as well as the transmission of the access token directly to the client without passing it through the resource owner's user agent and potentially exposing it to others. So this is, again, this code flow. The reason we're doing this code flow is, again, this is the code flow, the code grant. The resource owner is through the user agent directed to the authorization server. They are authenticated and do their authorization stuff, and then that code, this authorization comes back to the user agent. Remember, this user agent is not secure. So they've got some piece of information. This code contains the authorization grant, but it's insecure at this point. So the user agent is going to following C is going to pass that authorization code to the client, And now the client, which is secured, can exchange that authorization code to the authorization server and get back an access token. And that access token is now secured because it's never gone through the user agent. Remember, the authorization code went through the user agent, but then the client exchanged that for a token which has never been seen by the user agent. So very hard to hack that from the front end if somebody gets a hold of your, if there's some malware in your browser, it's not going to directly get the token. It may get the authorization code and do some interception, but it's the authorization server actually authenticates the client, we'll see later on. So that authorization code can't be used without this client being authenticated. So this client has a secret back here. I've talked about that a bunch of times. It's running on a secret, on a server, protected server. So it's got a password that it can authenticate with to prove that it's the right person using the right machine using the authorization code. So quick overview, quick in-depth overview, I guess. We'll get into it more as we talk about this again. You'll hear it again from me as I get into section 4. Now the implicit grant, I'm going to get into that in the next video. I'm going to take a break here and let my voice rest. We'll get into that in the next video, and I'll briefly go through that, and then that'll help me keep moving things forward. So you are watching a playlist here. I'm developing this playlist right now here, this Understanding the OAuth 2 directly from the IETF RFC 6749 spec. This is Terry Caliendo, Dedicated Managers, DMI, Technology Consulting. If you've got some work, if you need some work, just communicate, hit contact, let's become friends. Let's work together, let's create something big. How about that, huh? What else? Oh yeah, I am not an expert in this RFC 6749 spec, and I do these videos on the fly pretty much. I record them a couple times sometimes when I really screw up. But take everything I say with a grain of salt. Sometimes my brain doesn't work the same as my mouth. They kind of go on different paths, so I'm thinking one thing and I say another. So if something's confusing, throw it in the comments. I'll try to clarify. And if something's really bad, if I really screw something up, I'll probably redo the video. But anyway, if you're ever confused, check the comments to see if anybody else has been confused or if anybody else is even watching these videos. So thanks again for watching. Terry Caliendo, Dedicated Managers. See you in the next video. Happy coding. See you soon.